Bush on the couch. That's topic A tonight. Joining us tonight, author and psychiatrist Dr. Justin Frank. He claims the president's obsession with Saddam and the war in Iraq are symptoms of serious, unresolved anxiety. Analyze that. Now let's talk about his drinking, because obviously that was a key factor in Bush's
See, my sense is that when you're left alone and left on your own, the way he was, he had to compensate for a lot of different feelings, including aggression towards his sister, guilt about that. A lot of things that happen if you have a sibling die is you end up having kind of magical thinking that you might be responsible for it. And there was no way for him to metabolize any of those feelings. And my sense is that he had a chaos inside that he developed over time.
So just to recap, I mean, your theory is that displaced anxiety and failure to mourn his young sister Robin left him with feelings that have not been resolved.
Correct. And that what's happened is that over time, he's had to express his aggression in various displaced ways. He was, would be cruel to animals, and he drank pretty heavily until he was 40 years old in order to manage his anxiety and manage the kind of chaos within.
Richard Nixon once said it's better to be decisive than to be right if you're the president.
Yes, but I think that when he talks about killing women and children and then bombs Baghdad where we're killing women and children, one has to look at black and white thinking. That's a black and white statement.
On your part, sir, I mean.
No, I mean, I think that...
You're making a moral equivalence between those two things.
You mean killing children is okay if we do it, but not okay if they do it? Is that what you're saying?
Bombing the capital of a genocidal regime.
It's not genocidal. Where did you hear that it's genocidal?
The Saddam Hussein regime.
Is it genocidal?
I have been in the town of Halabja and seen the effects of the use of weapons of mass destruction. My point is, he is unable to take responsibility for his own behavior and unable to look at things. And it's a very disturbing quality, I think, in a president to not be introspective. And I think the idea about black and white, one then clings to being right. And so when facts come that are different from what his preconceptions are, he then has a problem metabolizing them and assessing them.
On our back page this week, Justin Frank is a Washington psychoanalyst who says he's got George W. Bush all figured out. So he's not your patient, and you haven't met him or analyzed him in person.
No, that's right. What I used is something that's called applied psychoanalysis, which is something that Freud first introduced about 100 years ago, and it's essentially applying psychoanalytic principles to studying somebody's life and studying them without having them in the office. So I lose out on the biggest tools of analysis, which are transference, the feelings the patient has towards me, and countertransference, the feelings I have towards him. The advantages I have is I get to see him outside my office all the time on TV, study clips, read what he's written, read what his parents have written. And this technique has been used by the State Department in hiring CIA psychiatrists to analyze Hitler.
Is author of In His Father's Shadow, and Dr. Justin Frank is author of Bush on the Couch. Next, they examine the psychological makeup of President Bush.
The fact that President Clinton tried to nationalize the vaccine industry, that many of them were driven out of business, and that we have fewer vaccine makers. These are complicated problems that won't be addressed by a soundbite from the Democratic Party, like, well, if you can't do vaccines, then you can't. That's just not the way to do it.
They are complicated, but one thing that has struck me about President Bush is that we can always find an excuse to blame President Clinton for something that he couldn't do, and we always find an excuse for President Bush. Whenever anything happens that's wrong, we find a way to make an excuse for him, and that is very typical of families when you have a person you're afraid of drinking again, when you have a family where there's a person who has to hang on, and you end up enabling, and you take one incident and you can make an excuse for it. Then you have another incident after this. You have an incident about how, oh, I didn't know Chalabi and he's sitting behind him, or I didn't do this, or there's no weapons of mass destruction. You take each one and you look at them alone instead of looking at them as part of a pattern overall. And then you start thinking about how come we take incidents, and that's what the children of alcoholic parents do. They look at one thing and they say, it's really not so bad, Daddy's okay. And I think that's a disturbing quality in the American people right now, not just in him, but in lots of us.